Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Bosch. I'm the chair of the Pearson Center. And welcome and thanks for joining us all today. I should begin by acknowledging that I'm joining you today from the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. Today, we have a discussion with our wonderful President Pam Damoff and Julie Savard-Shaw, who is the Executive Director of the Prosperity Project. I had the great pleasure of working with Julie on the Hill many, many years ago. And I'm eager, as everyone, to learn more about what she's created and the work that the Prosperity Project is doing. So with this, I'd like to turn you over to you, Pam Damoff. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kevin. And um, Julie, thank you so much for joining us today. Just before we start, I do want to just acknowledge our sustaining partners. We have MAPCO, the Canadian Building Trades Union, TikTok, Fasken, Bruce Power, and Sandstone. Um, so, Julie, you and I have known each other for a few years now, and you left to head up the Prosperity Project. And I wonder, for those that are tuning in who don't know what you do at TPP, as it's lovingly known, um, it's uniquely Canadian. And I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about the Prosperity Project.
Absolutely. And thank you for having me today. So, the Prosperity Project is a fairly small charity. We only have 5 staff, but we do much more than what our small team, what you would think that we would be able to do. So, TPP was created in 2020 during the pandemic by a group of 62 senior executive women. So, I'm talking here about women that sit on many corporate boards across Canada, CEOs, senators. And they came together because they were afraid of what the pandemic's impact would be on women in the workforce. As we all know now, the pandemic did have a huge impact on women in the workforce. Um, Mostly, because women were taking a disproportionate amount of the care responsibilities. And at the beginning of the pandemic, the sort of flexible and remote work wasn't figured out fully yet. So at TPP now, we focus on some of the biases and the barriers that have been exacerbated during the pandemic. We do that by supporting women directly. So we have the only free mentorship program in Canada that is for women in their career. It's a 6 month program, it's a one on one program, it's virtual, so it's accessible to everyone, and it's bilingual. And it's absolutely no cost for women to participate. We also have professional development workshops. So, for example, we had one recently that was really well attended around how to overcome imposter syndrome, for example. And we also focus on research. So, our research looks at collecting Canadian data only. Unlike many other organizations, we only look at the Canadian landscape. So, what we are most known for, I would say, is our annual report card. And the annual report card essentially collects the data from the top 500 companies by revenue in Canada. We use the FP 500 list. And so we've decided to use that because we believe that it's a good representation of the Canadian economy. It includes private, public, crown corporations, and cooperatives. Um, and we basically go out to these companies and ask them to send us the number of women that are represented at 4 levels of leadership. So we look at the board level, the C suite level, senior management, and pipeline to senior management. And we believe it's important to really dive deeper than the top 2 levels because that gives us a sense of who will be around the decision making table in 10, 15 years. But we don't just collect the information about men and women. We look at the different identities. So for each level, they send us the data for Black women, Indigenous women, women of color, true LGBTQ, and women with disabilities. So based on those numbers, we release a report every year, and we analyze, how the Canadian economy is doing, where there are gaps, and from that, we identify where we need to dig a little bit deeper. And those other pieces of research are called our Canadian household perspectives. So, for example, um, you know, we have been seeing for a couple years that there is a continued drop in the number of women in the pipeline to leadership. So we would dig a little bit deeper as to why that is. We do it through various means. Surveys, focus groups. This year, we've done it a bit differently, where we're actually speaking to the companies directly to hear, the kinds of feedback that they get from their exit interviews, for example. So, in a nutshell, that's what we do. And we also receive for the first time Government of Canada funding. So, through that, it's called the Impact Project. We are organizing roundtable discussions between community groups and companies. The goal is to really create change from the bottom up. What we're seeing right now, and I think just generally speaking, it's a tendency in society to sort of create those policies and the programs at the top and sort of have it implemented and go down. But we're not seeing any movement. We're not seeing improvement. So something has to change. And so the idea is that these community groups that are themselves in contact with the women that are being impacted by the various policies and programs, they hear what's working, they hear what's not working. And so during these roundtables, it's it's a chance to respectfully sort of speak truth to power. And it's been really, really beneficial, incredible conversations. I'm really looking forward to the document that we'll create from it, that we'll be releasing this year, um, around really actionable measures that companies can take that are grounded in what the community organizations are saying actually works. So, in a
So what
nutshell,
kind of
that's what we do.
well, that's a lot, and I know you do even more than that. But what kind of community groups did you have involved, Julie?
hmm So, we really work to have a representation of all of the groups of the identities that we track in the annual report card, as well as regional representation. So, we've had 2S LGBTQ groups. We've had Black women's networks attend, Indigenous women's groups attend. We've had a Francophone women group from the north attend. So a really really wide range of group, but the focus is really on ensuring representation.
So, o- I know there was a stat on your website that only 1% of senior leaders are Black, Indigenous, queer, trans, women with disabilities. Um, and then, how do we ensure that that changes? Because a lot of times, I find the focus is just on having women represented without looking at the intersectionality. And you and I both know that without representation at the table, whether it's women, whether it's someone with a disability, um, companies are making worse decisions. They're not making good decisions for their business, right? So you have the stats, which is terrific to be able to have that because we didn't have that in Canada before. How do we look at changing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something that we are trying to work on through these roundtables and through our research. Um, the first thing I would say is actually collecting the data, right? So many companies still don't collect the disaggregated data. So they only have information on how many men and women. Um, but as you've just said, the number of women with different identities is very different than if you look at just the overall number. So that's the first thing. And then I would say once you start collecting that is um, developing goals and sticking to them and focusing your recruitment strategies and your retention strategies, um, to ensure that the women that you recruit from those groups want to stay in your company. That's done, frankly, mostly by having the top people in the companies really embrace it by changing the culture. You can't expect to retain Indigenous women if there's absolutely no recognition in the company of some of the truth and reconciliation actions. For example, you may be successful in recruiting them if you, for some reason, you're offering a high salary, or you approach them in a certain way, and you just so happen to be successful, but you're not going to retain them if the culture isn't conducive to it. um, and that's actually what we're seeing more and more, is that some companies are successful in recruiting them. So the numbers of women at entry level, we don't collect that information, but others do. The numbers of women at the entry level are much higher, but the higher up you go, the fewer women there are. And so it's really about the culture and the practices of a company. Um, and we've moved past the, you know, performative action. I think people now are serious about wanting to feel included and wanting to feel supported. So companies that sort of view um, inclusion and diversity as something that they just need to tick a box, those companies will not be doing well. But the companies that actually um, spend time listening to their employees, are doing the work to change the culture, are not shifting with the wind every time there's a new political element coming out, those are the companies that will, in the long term, make more profit and just be way more successful.
Well, I recently saw a speaker and she talked about remote work and how the people who benefit the most from remote work are people with disabilities. And I hadn't even thought about that. Whether maybe you're in a wheelchair and the commute from, I live in Oakville to Toronto on the GO train is quite cumbersome. If you can work remotely, you might be more encouraged to stay. And it was something. Have you looked at that at all? Remote work and
Yeah.
its impact.
So that's actually going to come out in our report coming out in September. I'll give you a sneak peek. This year, the number of women at all levels that identify as having a disability has dropped significantly, and we think that it's because we only started tracking numbers during the pandemic, and so people were working from home. And we think that that drop is due to the return to work mandate or return to office mandate.
Hmm. Yeah, it's
Um,
one of those things. It's fairly easy and inexpensive for companies to accommodate disabilities, but it's not on the radar. And if you actually have people in leadership within the company who have a disability or whatever group it is, who can speak to that, it changes the policies that companies put in place, right?
Absolutely. Another group that we've heard from that have felt the positive effects of remote work are actually Black women. And everything related to microaggressions in the workplace and the mental health toll that that has. We've heard it was much easier and much better um, in the sort of remote work environment than when they are in the office.
That's amazing. Let's talk about childcare. I know you've done a lot of research on that. I also know that you and I have spoken about it and both agree on how important it is. So maybe talk about some of the work that you've done on this and why childcare is important and what type of childcare that's offered.
hmm So even prior to my arrival, when TPP was first founded, the founding visionaries, as we call them, were very active in terms of advocacy for childcare. We all agree that childcare is the number one support that women can have in terms of enabling their participation and success in the economy. So TPP has been advocating for investment by the federal government for the National Childcare Strategy, which was successfully announced in, I should know this, budget 2021.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, no, it was before. Yes, it was 2021. You're right, because then we went
Yeah.
into the election campaign
Hmm.
in the fall of 21. So yes, it was the spring of 2021. I cried when I heard that that was going to be in
Yeah.
there.
And no, it was,
And with matching funding. So you can't just announce you're going to have a childcare program without the federal government putting in, and I think it was 30+ billion dollars that we provided when it was first rolled out.
hmm yeah, no, a significant investment, but an investment that has huge return, right? And I think that's the piece that is often missing from the conversation. Everyone talks about, oh, that was so much money. And it's like, yes, but the money that we're actually going to get back from that and in the long term is, I think, is double or triple. We actually have those numbers. I should know that by heart on our website. We've worked closely with Professor Cleveland, who's a known childcare economist, and he does all those calculations. But yeah, the return on investment for that is huge. So, with that being announced, we turned our advocacy to make sure that the provinces and the territories and the federal government were all working to make sure that the money was actually being spent. Because what was happening, and everyone has seen this across the country, is um, you know after the announcement, everyone was signing up to get a $10 a day spot, but the demand was much higher than the supply, and it still is. And so the advocacy was focused, and it still is, on ensuring that there are um, daycares being built fast enough, that there are changes to the salary, for example, of childcare workers, because right now they're having difficulty recruiting and retaining childcare workers because the salary and the conditions are just not great. So that's been more of the focus. Um, of course, a few months ago, prior to the election, the focus was also on making sure that the national childcare strategy was not at risk. With the conservative government, we didn't know what was going to happen. Um, and it was just very important for us to make sure that they saw the economic benefit of keeping a national childcare strategy. So, our latest report on childcare focuses on how doing a Harper style model of sort of individual checks is actually much more costly to the government than investing in the national childcare strategy. So that report was really well received, in fact, by everyone. And that report also digs into things that we don't talk enough about. So, for example, um, the motherhood penalty, right? Like, um, 10 years after having a child, women still often make less than what they would have made had they got not left for maternity leave. Or the just sort of penalty on your career, right? Like, because care responsibilities still fall mostly on women, the, I wouldn't say the inability, but the reticence of women to sort of raise their hands to say, yes, I want to go up the leadership ladder, or being overlooked because the hiring manager or whomever is like, oh, well, she has to leave at 4 every day. So, we need someone that can be here till 9. Um, but yes, all that to say, there's a huge economic cost. And I really hope that this current government will continue to make sure that um, childcare funding is a priority. They signed agreements before the election, so that was a really good news. But I really encourage this current government to keep focusing on that and to make sure that the money is being rolled out um, in a efficient year, because we can't wait another 2-3 years. The wait times are still really long.
When I was, well, as someone who did not benefit from cheap childcare, And I can remember what a financial burden that was when my son was in daycare. Um, but also the choice that I made to not advance. And I have no regrets about the choices that I made. But it definitely affected my career trajectory.
Mhm.
Um, but I don't think enough people realize the economic benefit of the having this child care program. We did a study at the Status of Women Committee on the economic empowerment of women. And it was the number one recommendation that we had. All parties agreed because it was such a barrier to women returning to work. And also, it needs to be something, sending a check to people or a tax credit means that you have to have the money up front to pay for
Mhm.
childcare. And if you don't have that money up front to pay for a year of childcare in order to get some kind of a rebate, it just doesn't work. Whereas this is allowing them to get into the workforce, but it increased the GDP, as you were saying. It was huge. So it's not just the right thing to do; it's actually an economic imperative if we want to
Mhm.
continue to grow the economy to make sure that childcare is accessible to everyone who wants it. Um, so I'm a huge proponent of its availability, and I'm seeing it in my own family who now have little ones and the ability to actually make it affordable for them. Um, Completely changing topics here. You recently did a report on athletic participation for women in leadership, which is um, not what I would think would be research that would be interesting, but in fact, it is really interesting. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about what you found?
Mhm. Yes, you're right. It's a little bit outside of our normal scope of what we focus on. Um, but in fact, it's very much in line with what we focus on at TPP in terms of how we can support women in positions of leadership or how we can support women to get to positions of leadership. We found that senior executive women were more likely than middle managers to consider themselves as current athletes. And so we therefore sort of looked at the numbers and determined that, in fact, continuous sport participation acts as a career boost. And, you know, it's interesting because it sort of makes sense when you're senior manager and the middle manager, there's a lot of work. You're sort of, I mean, we hear it all the time from women that are managers. They feel even more squeezed than when they were in lower position and when they're in higher position. um, but the data suggests that, in fact, if a woman was to continue playing actively in sports, and I say playing, but we also consider, let's say, yoga or running or swimming, as long as it's continuous, like it's sort of on a weekly basis, um, they would develop the skills that are necessary to be able to advance in your career and the skills that are helpful to advance in your career. So we're talking here about like resilience, um, not courage. What's the word I'm looking for? Gosh, uh, basically the opposite of imposter syndrome.
Confidence.
Confidence. Thank you. My Frenchness is coming out. Um, and sort of team, working well with a team, all the skills that, we know you gain from sports, but the connection has never necessarily been made from a career perspective. There's a lot of research on the benefits of sports for girls, and that's wonderful. And absolutely, we need to continue encouraging girls. But there's, as far as we know, have not been research done on encouraging women that are in their career to keep playing sports. And our data suggests that, in fact, if companies were to, for example, invest in health bonus or health pool that women could use to sign up, for the gym or a sports team. There could be huge returns on that. And that's one of the recommendations that we have is that companies should look at adding participation in sports as a benefit to their packages.
That's really cool. I just find that so interesting. And when you talk about it, intuitively, it actually does make a lot of sense.
Hmm.
But it isn't something that I would think um, just naturally to think about that participation and leadership, right? Um, so thank you for doing that and shining a spotlight on it. Um,
Hmm. Of course.
Back in March, you wrote a really great op-ed about the importance of a minister for women and gender equality because at the time that particular minister had been dropped from cabinet. Now the government did after the election has reappointed a minister for women and gender equality. Richie Valdez is fulfilling that role. Can you maybe share with us why you feel this cabinet position is important and why that position needs to be one that's included in every decision that the government makes?
Hmm. When I wrote that op-ed and posted on LinkedIn, I had so many messages sent to me saying, it doesn't matter if there's a minister or not. All decisions now in cabinet have a GBA plus lens, a gender-based analysis plus lens. They have to put it in the in the memorandum to cabinet. It's about making sure that it's part of the conversation, and it will be. And the reality is that it's not really, unless someone actually brings it up and makes sure that it's part of the conversation. It is too easy to forget the gender lens in economic decisions, in decisions, regarding anything for this country. And so for me, I think it was also the timing, with everything happening in the US, with women's rights being under attack, um, not just in the US, like across the world, like there's just a regression of women's advancement. And it just felt like it was sort of I won't say what I actually want to say because we're on the podcast, but it it was not the right message, in my opinion, to send at a time when, yeah, the world needs Canada to keep demonstrating that women's equality, or I should say gender equality, is important in Canada, and that that's not going to change. Um, and I think, I talked about the discussions in cabinet, but it's also about funding. Like we receive Government of Canada funding, and it's enabling us to host these really important conversations. But so many other organizations receive that funding, and without a minister, sure, the department may still exist, but who is actually leading the vision for what that department is, or um, who is leading the vision in terms of how they want to work with stakeholders across the country? Like, I just think it it was interesting, and it's still interesting to me how, at a time when we were trying to reduce the number of people in cabinet, um, like the gender component was just easily taken out. And to me, that's what's concerning, is that it didn't, to so many people it wasn't an issue. And the fact that it wasn't an issue, to me, is the issue, because it just means that if we could so easily, even in Canada, even if people say that gender is part of the conversation and we apply gender equality lens, um, it could just be sidelined, because it was so
Yeah.
easily.
Well, you and I worked on gun control together and know that people don't automatically assume that firearms is a women's issue, except that it is. And, a woman's 500 times more likely to be killed if there's a firearm in the home. If you don't have someone around the cabinet table that's going to bring that lens, and not just on gun control, but on so many issues, I think both you and I, having been in the government, and yes, there is a gender-based analysis, but look, there's nothing that replaces lived experience. Um,
Hmm.
and bringing that to the cabinet table, excuse me, and having someone to be championing certain things. Um, so I just loved it when I read what you had written, and I think there's a number. I think there was a letter that had over 400 signatures
Yeah.
from women's organizations across the country, um, that said this is a really important position to have in around the cabinet table, and really needs to be one that's included in the decision making process. So thank you for doing that, Julie.
Yeah.
It was well
Thank you.
written.
Thank you for raising it. And happy to see that the government did
Hmm.
change their mind and reestablish that position.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. So you mentioned a little bit about the mentoring that you do. It's the Rosie Initiative,
Yeah.
and can you maybe expand on it a little bit? And also, I saw you did a LinkedIn post the other day about the difference between sponsorship and mentorship,
Yes.
and why both are important. So can you, like, what is the Rosie Initiative, and if someone is interested in being part of it, how do they become part of it?
Hmm. Um, yeah, so the Rosie Mentorship Initiative is a mentorship program. We have three cohorts a year. So usually we launch one in the winter, like early winter, spring, and then in the fall. Um, Essentially, we recruit, well, mentees apply. So any woman, so for mentees, I should clarify, it is only for self identifying women. Um, and you could be at any stage in your career. You could be starting out, or you could be pretty advanced. We have mentors that are sort of, well, up to corporate board directors. So we even had like a CEO sign up. She asked if she could be a mentee, and I said yes. I had to hand select someone to be her mentor, but um, and so mentees right now, I will be honest, we have a huge surge in demand. So we get approximately like 300 application per cohorts. We're only able to match probably between 100 and 150 per cohort because we never have enough mentors. So if you're listening, what we really do need is mentors. For mentors, you could be any gender, so men, women, and you sign up. The minimum requirement in terms of experience is 10 years. So we ask that mentors have 10 years of professional experience. And we do the matching in house. We still do it by a human, so it's not done by AI. And I think that really, I mean, it's proven to uh, like really strengthen the match of between a mentor and mentee because it's based on a number of different things. But 80% of our matches um, go through the whole process, and a number of them stay even connected afterwards. Um, so yes, mentors in any industry. Our mentorship program is more focused on the supports and the skills and the building confidence to advance to positions of leadership, no matter what sector you're in. Um, Through Rosie, we also offer different workshops. So we have approximately one a month. Those are also free to participate right now. Um, Everything's on our website. I should know our website, gosh, www.canadianprosperityproject.ca. Um, or follow us on LinkedIn, and we share a lot of that information. And yes, the comment on sponsorship and mentorship. I mean, I it really angers me that we have been pitting mentorship and sponsorship against each other, because I think you need both. Um, and they both have very different, I would say, outcomes. You, you know, if we're not working in the same company or at the same sector, it would be very difficult for you to be my sponsor because you're not in the rooms that, you know, I would need you to be in to basically say my name. But you could very well be my mentor and help me to develop the skills that I need to gain confidence or, develop my presentation skills or whatever have you. So when people say, "Oh, women are over mentored," I just I get angry because how can you ever be over mentored? Like, I wish I was over mentored. Um, and B, they serve different purposes. So mentorship is essential. Sponsorship is also essential. And sponsorship, for those who don't know the difference, is more about having someone who will advocate for you internally or at events where there are different job opportunities. Basically, it's someone that will say your name when you're not around. Um, but to have that sponsorship, really, it's also a very different relationship, right? You really have to, um, the sponsor needs to have trust in your skills and your capabilities if they're going to share your name or offer you as a recommendation for a job. Whereas a mentor, I think it's less about your capabilities. Like they end up, I'm sure, through their relationship, you end up believing in your mentee. But again, it's a very different relationship. It's about skills development versus um, sponsorship. It's sort of, I can't find the word to explain it, but
No, but
does
but
that
I
make
mean
sense?
they're both good to have. Absolutely, it does. And you mentioned confidence, and you know, I've heard this repeatedly. I know you have too. That whether it's a job opportunity or running for elected office,
Mm-hmm.
women feel they need to have all 10 skills before they'll even apply, whereas a man will apply if he has 5 skills and says, "But I'll learn the other 5 on the job." And so women
Mm-hmm.
often do not apply for promotions or um, for different jobs. I know when I was asked if I would run federally, I didn't say yes right away, and well, do I have enough experience and all the rest of it? And then a friend of mine actually said, "Well, what have you got to lose by doing it?" And it was like, yeah, it was a man who said that to me. But the confidence that you can get through mentorship to say, look at, like, make that leap of faith. We tend to, I think it's something that starts when kids are young, whereas we try to protect girls, and boys we say go out and scrape your knee and
Mm-hmm.
swing on that high bar. And with girls it's like, well, don't, be cautious. And then when you end up in the business world, um, you don't necessarily have the confidence to apply for positions. Just speak up, right? You're in a meeting, there's 20 people around a boardroom table. To have the confidence to put your idea out there and do so with confidence, as opposed to I mean, a speaker you and I have both talked about, Professor Maya. She said, we often start with, "I'm sorry." "Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. I have an idea I'd like to share." Just jump right in there. And those are the kind of things that a mentor can share with someone, to sort of give them that confidence to participate and take, look at opportunities. That's not something that necessarily a sponsor would be able to give, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Um, so the last thing I wanted to talk about was, there's a huge pushback right now on um, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and of course, gender falls into that, and a lot of it often focuses on, well, your gain as a woman is my loss. And it was interesting yesterday. I had someone say she'll often explain it that, do you ever push the accessible button when you go into a building? And people will say yes. Well, that was an accommodation that was made for people with
Mm-hmm.
disabilities. but
That's a
as
great
someone,
example.
isn't it?
Yeah.
But it means that everybody can benefit from it, right? So that's what are some of the things that you can say for us to just dispel these ideas that um, that because women are rising to the top, it means that if there's no meritocracy, they don't have the skills, or
Hmm.
that the people are actually losing out, which is not. It's just not the case. The numbers don't back it up. But can you maybe share with us some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start by saying that I think actually the diversity, equity, and inclusion, so DEI sector, has not done a great job at actually being inclusive, right? It's become so focused on the different terminology, the different um, letters and acronyms that it has actually made people feel excluded, which is the opposite of what we're trying to accomplish. Um, so that's the first thing I'll say. And then the second thing is that I also don't think that some of the programs and policies are actually being rolled out or carried out in how they are intended to be carried out. I'll give you an example. Um, my brother works for a company and they have a policy for DEI for recruitment. And so he has to have a certain number of individuals that identify in for each identity. And um, and throughout the interview process, that remains the case. But there comes a point where I've spoken to so many chief diversity officers across corporate Canada where diver- DEI initiatives should be applied at the initial stages when it's about ensuring that everyone has equitable access. So those numbers at the beginning stages, I think, would make sense. But the higher up you go in the interview process, that's where it can become a challenge because if he's then forced to have, let's say, one black woman and one of whatever, eh, like he's not necessarily picking the two top individuals based on merit. Um, and so that policy or that program is not being actually rolled out in the way that it should be. And that's where I think it has created a lot of frustrations because, of course, if you are a white heterosexual man and he's a white heterosexual man and he's seeing this, he has to do this. He's angry. Like he's putting himself in the shoe of if he was applying and saying, well, I could be the better candidate than this black woman, but because she's that black woman and that's the box that the employee or employer has to tick, then she's being added to that interview. So at the end of the day, I think it's a mix right now of um, people having felt excluded from the DEI sector, or yeah, lingo, whatever we call it, and a mix of it not being applied properly. If you take those two elements away and we actually stop using lingo and we talk about inclusion and we talk about meritocracy and we talk about making sure everyone has equal access and we actually give equal access to people and there's no box ticking and we simply look at how do we remove the barriers for the person to have the same opportunities. I just don't see how someone can be against that. But we have ourselves politicized it, I think. And so, we're seeing more and more. I think the big first um, let's say organization in Canada to do it was the University of Calgary, I think came out announcing that they were changing the name of their DEI policy. And you had people being like, oh, that's, that means they're walking away from it. And others being like, no, actually, if you read, it's almost exactly the same as it would have been. They're just calling it something different so that people feel more included. Um, and so I think, yeah, in terms of the backlash, I just think that backlash is coming from people who have felt excluded, and we have not done a good job at making them feel included. Because, as you say, ultimately, if you're removing the barrier for one person, you're actually removing the barrier for everyone. So, um, I think it's actually an opportunity for us. You know, it's not a fun time to be in the DEI sector right now,
No.
but it is an opportunity for us to demonstrate that um, equitable access and inclusion is beneficial for everyone. It actually leads to better decision making. Like the research is clear. You mentioned it earlier. The
Mhm.
more diverse voices you have around a decision making table, the higher the profit. Like, you know, it, companies can no longer just have one product. They need to have products or whatever they offer that are well received by various groups. Like we're just not homogeneous anymore. And if you don't have representations from those groups around the decision making table, how are you going to know what they like or what they want? So
Yeah, and you're right when you mentioned ticking a box. I think a lot of companies tick the box that we'll do one workshop for all our employees,
yeah,
and then
yeah.
we've met the without actually changing the culture.
Hmm.
And I remember a witness that testified at Status of Women Committee about how, well, I've heard this from a couple people, but how a job is advertised has a
Hmm.
lot of difference on who applies. And just changing it was for a software company where they realized that the wording was attracting men to apply, and by changing certain words in the job offer or the ad for the job, that they were actually getting different people applying. And I remember a gentleman that owned Tim Hortons franchises who hired a lot of people living with disability. He said, just put um, all welcome to apply. He said, you don't have to be all that.
Hmm.
Just say we're open. And I remember him saying to me that he initially hired someone with a disability because he thought it was the right thing to do, but that person never missed a day of work, inspired all of the other employees to show up and work harder. And as a result, it was a huge difference to his bottom line. So he became a huge advocate for the hiring. But I think sometimes we over the last few years have just simplified things so much that there has been a big backlash, and it does impact the good work that you're doing. I guess to close off, is there anything about TPP that you didn't get to touch on that you'd like to, Julie?
No, I think we talked about some really important topics and all the work that we do. I would be remiss to not share that we are a charity, as I said, in the DEI space. It's a difficult space right now, so if anyone has the capacity and feels so inclined, donations are very welcome, and we issue charitable tax receipts. And as I said, mentors, we're always looking for mentors. So that's a really great way, and it's free to give your time. And it really does impact women. We have a few, stories on our websites of women that have benefited from mentorship. One pops to mind. Um, in 6 months of her mentorship, she had um, she changed positions, so she went up from manager to senior manager, and 6 months after her mentorship program she went to director level. So within a year
Wow.
she jumped from manager to director, and she directly she directly well, she claims that it's as a direct result of the work that she did through her mentorship, and how it helped her develop those skills and just that way of thinking. So, um, yeah, it does have a direct impact on people.
So I double checked, and it is CanadianProsperityProject.ca.
Perfect.
All of the reports that we talked about, the research that you've done, People can apply for the mentorship on there. I mean, one of the things at the Pearson Center we want to do is just expose people to um, ideas and activities that are happening out there. And maybe my hope is that people might think a little bit differently about things. So I just want to commend you, Julie, on the work you're doing there. It's so important, and you're making such a difference for Canadians and for Canadian women. So um, thank you. And I see Kevin has joined us again. So I'll let Kevin close us off.
I did. I wanted to thank you both. That was a fascinating discussion, and I learned a lot. And so I think it's something that all of us need to know more about because diversity leads to economic prosperity, and I think the more people understand that, the better. So it's wonderful. Thanks, Pam, for mentioning our sustaining sponsors off the top. We can't mention them enough, so I'll do it again. Thank you to AMAPCO, to TikTok Canada, to the Canadian Building Trades Union, to Faskins, to Bruce Power, and to Sandstone Group. These are the groups that sustain us throughout the year, so thank you very much. And thank you to all of you for taking the time to listen and participate, and we look forward to bringing you more of these discussions in the year to come. Thank you.